We're joined by Keith Coughlan, Executive Chairman at European Metals. Keith, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Good to see you again.
Recently announced a significant development, a $36 million grant from the Just Transition Fund in the EU. Why is this grant so important and what does it mean to the project?
Well, it's important for two reasons. Firstly, $36 million is $36 million, and it obviously helps a lot, particularly with some of the earlier stage works that it's designed to be used for. But perhaps even more importantly than the quantum of the funds is the fact that it's another endorsement from the EU, from the Czech government for the project. The selection committees at both levels, don't want to be endorsing and providing funding to projects that they don't think are going to be successful. So I think it indicates, again, another endorsement very strongly that both of those groups believe that Synovets is going ahead and will help in facilitating that and enabling the project.
As you touched on, another endorsement from a key stakeholder. Clearly in the development of a project such as this, stakeholders are important. EU, government, they're the people who are going to ultimately decide if this project goes ahead. Now, how important is it that they've already given those ticks in a lot of respects, not to permitting, not to final licensing, but to the key element of that this is a strategic project and they want to support it? Well,
I think it's vital. I think it's one of the most important aspects of the entire project and where we are in the life of the project. These decisions are not taken lightly. I think our first announcement with regards to the Just Transition Fund was January of last year. So it's taken well over a year to get from that point in time to the final approval. So this is not something that gets rushed through. The CRMA and our endorsement as a strategic project under that legislation similarly has been a long time coming. And whilst that can be frustrating that these things do take so long, it makes you realise that at the end of the day, it's been very well considered, very well researched. All the relevant bodies have done significant due diligence in arriving at these decisions. And I think that just should give a greater level of confidence to everyone with regards to the project.
Does it surprise you, or probably maybe it surprises the market, that this momentum is coming at a project level for a commodity that is not loved at the moment in the market, but you're getting the momentum and everything is saying that this project is proposed to be developed with all the key stakeholders aligning with their support at a time when the market for lithium isn't at its best. It's in relative terms at a low at the moment, but clearly there's some long-term thinking here from key stakeholders.
Absolutely, and that is important, and that's something that we have to understand. This is all about long-term planning, long-term geopolitical security. We're at a very interesting stage globally for geopolitics. What we're seeing for some years now out of China, but more recently out of the US, and the fact that that's led the EU to double down on their commitments to energy transition and their commitments to ensuring that they can achieve a measure of independence with regards to critical raw materials to enable that energy transition. So yes, look, in some regards, it's a little unfortunate that this level of endorsement and support is not coming, when we've got historically high lithium prices. But, it's easy for people to get on board when you're in a bull market and the prices are up. I think, again, people should understand that this means, or at least in my mind, it means that the commitment is very real. This is not a bull market decision. This is a long-term commitment to the energy transition, to green energy, to a battery industry and an electric vehicle future in the EU, but also a commitment to trying to achieve some measure of mineral security with regards to the critical raw materials to enable that energy transition.
Now, importantly, and I think people often forget because they have been associated with the project now for several years, but ČEZ, which is the Czech government's energy business, is your project partner and is more than a project partner. They're a key partner and a key ally in the development of this project. Firstly, tell us a little bit about CHES for those who may have forgotten who they are and only see the name on a ASX announcement. But more importantly, how closely are they aligned to the development of this project?
So firstly, CHES is the national power utility in the Czech Republic, largest power utility in the region and the biggest company in the Czech Republic. It is 69–70% owned by the Czech government, but it operates very independently. It has an independent board and a separate independent advisory board. It's a publicly listed company, and I think the market capitalisation is about 45 billion euros currently. So they're a big company. They employ something over 30,000 people in the region, Czech Republic and surrounding regions. So they own the entire power grid throughout the Czech Republic. They've historically fed that grid by mining and burning brown coal. There's obviously a transition away from coal-fired power stations in the region, and CHES out at the forefront of that movement. They have significant green energy assets already, wind farms, solar farms, etc. They're exploring small nuclear reactor power sources as well. That's been in the press recently. They own all of the electric vehicle charging stations in the Czech Republic. And, you know, from an operational perspective, CHES have been operating in the country very successfully for many decades. So when it comes down to things like liaising with Czech forests or liaising with the railways or what have you, you know, CHES has been doing that for decades. And it's so refreshing for us to have someone like that in our corner doing that work for us or giving us input in those sort of fields. They're also obviously very well connected with the Czech government. But despite that, it's interesting, and I think it's a positive that the project still has to stand on its own 2 feet, and it has to tick the boxes that any other project of this nature would have to tick. We don't get rubber stamped through things, you know, just because CHES is CHES. You know, we have to go through the process, and I think that's a positive. You know, it means that the project will be done properly, done to the highest level of quality through every criteria. And it means that when we do get these results, as we've seen, the Just Transition Fund and the final approval for the Just Transition Fund, although it is an EU-based fund, the final approval is a Czech government approval. And the fact that that came some months after the EU's final approval on it, again, reiterates, I think, what I already said. CHES are fully committed to this project. They're fully committed to a green energy future. They still have aspirations to be involved in battery gigafactory production out of the Czech Republic if they can find the right partners to help them in that endeavour. And so, you know, this fits exactly in with their future plans.
And are they active at project level?
So the project level company, GeoMet, is the senior management is 2 CHES people and 1 EMH person, if you like, to simplify it. At the GeoMet board level, similarly, they have a majority at the GeoMet board level. So they're active in as much as, you know, they are a 45 billion euro market cap company with a lot of other interests. So if you looked at it from a financial point of view, it's a relatively small investment for them, but it is a significant investment because of their future plans. So the people from CHES who are actively involved in the project are as committed to this happening as we at European Metals are committed.
And looking forward, DFS due mid-year, you've historically, as in recent months, improved the flow sheet, improved some of the recovery techniques. How's that all tracking? Is it tracking on target, and are you still expecting a mid-year deadline for the DFS?
Yes, it is. It is tracking on target. You know, given the time now to the completion, you know, obviously we have set the final flow sheet for the DFS. We can't mess with it much more between now and the publication of the DFS. But a lot of those enhancements and optimizations have been driven by cost factors, both CapEx and OpEx. Obviously, you know, we already spoke about the current price of lithium. So, we've been very keenly looking at all of the financial aspects of the DFS so we can deliver robust numbers. And also, happily, a lot of those financial optimizations also have improved already very good ESG credentials for the project as well.
And coming back to the grant that's just been announced and sort of the boxes that have all been ticked along the way, does that package of boxes, if you like, now help you move into project financing or other potential support from the EU that potentially at a project level could improve the economics?
Well, yes, definitely. There's interconnection between all of the groups in the EU that we need to bring to bear on this project to get it successfully built. So, the Just Transition Fund doesn't operate in a vacuum. The CRMA doesn't operate in a vacuum. They all talk to each other. You know that we have the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development as a shareholder of European Metals already. They don't operate in a vacuum. They talk very closely with the other parties. They talk very closely with the EIB, the European Investment Bank. And if you like, there's a collective approach to endorsing and supporting a project. No one of those entities or organisations operates solely, on their own. They all talk to each other. So when we saw the Critical Raw Materials Act strategic project list announced, it's no coincidence. Excuse me. It's no coincidence that very shortly after that, the EIB made a public statement about doubling its commitment to financing projects, critical raw material projects in the energy transition field, and that's doubling of what was already, a big commitment. And they simultaneously announced a commitment to an additional €2 billion of funding this calendar year. So, those things are all connected. We have seen the EIB give conditional commitment to other projects similar to our own over the last few months. And those projects in their timelines are a little ahead of Synovate. So it's not that we are missing out. It's just, when our DFS is published, the conversations that we're currently having with people like EIB start to become more formal, with a view to taking that through to concluding some sort of agreement with them. There's also, with the level of support we're seeing in Brussels and also in various of the member states' own governments, a number of other funding options coming to light. The German government now has a critical raw materials fund. The French government has committed to a critical raw materials fund managed by Infravia out of Paris. And so there are emerging various alternate sources of potential financing. There are other potential either grant schemes that we could potentially tap into, and having been formally approved by one, you would presume, is a good starting point if you make an application to another grant scheme. So I think that there is definitely a groundswell of support for the sector and for projects like Synovate, and now specifically for Synovate.
And just coming back to the question about project economics, clearly, if you're not chasing equity or you're not potentially needing to use a complete full commercial debt package, it's going to improve the economics.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the plan, David. Yes, I mentioned EIB. EIB typically provides project finance at rates that are significantly lower than the commercial banks. They don't need to provide a return to their financiers, to their shareholders. The return they provide to their shareholders is economic stimulus, within the regions, obviously. So, every dollar, every euro that you can finance through something like that over commercial banks improves the economics of the project.
So looking forward, DFS, clearly a key milestone. Is there anything else that investors should be focusing on over the next 3-6 months that has the potential to add value to both the project and the company?
Yeah, look, we've a number of times you and I have spoken and talked about offtake. offtake discussions are still very much on foot and are only enhanced by all of those other factors we've spoken about here today. The greatest problem with offtake right now is the relevant relative difference between the current spot price of lithium and where we'd like to see it to finalise offtake deals. We'd like offtake that had pricing based upon a floor and ceiling mechanism, and we probably now need to get to final numbers on the DFS before we lock those things away. But it's more important to secure proper offtake, proper bankable offtake, than it is just to give the market a headline on a non-binding sort of offtake agreement.
Is there potential, and this is probably a preemptive question, but is there a potential that the DFS comes out that doesn't look like amazingly economic because of where the current price is, but you could do an offtake deal that makes it very economic?
Yeah, that is possible. I don't know that there's too many lithium projects in the world that are, making a tremendous amount of money at today's spot price, but a lot of them are still selling lithium at prices significantly higher than today's spot price because of historic contracts that they have in place. So, and this is one thing about the lithium market that means it's not particularly transparent. People quote the Chinese spot price. It's one number in the lithium universe, and it's not necessarily the most transparent or the most accurate number to be bearing in mind when you're talking about long-term offtake contracts. We have seen studies announced over the last 6 or 8 months that have been have inputs of much higher lithium prices in their financial models.
Well, you've got a project and a company that's ticking all the boxes at the right time. Momentum is clearly building. Some big milestones ahead that investors will watch with interest. We continue to watch with interest. Keith, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Always good to chat.